national struggle during the colonial period, we envisaged a modern new India, a Nav Bharat. That ethos were forged in the mass movement of the national struggle, and key elements of this ethos form part of the constitution, which Dr. Sandhya also mentioned here. If you look at very clearly, it talks about justice in three spheres: social, economic, and political. Not just political or social, but also economic. So, okay, all three have been talked about in this constitution. If you look at the history of modern science in India, when I say modern science, we mean science development after Galileo. I mean, usually it's called as post-Galilean sciences. We have to go to the Battle of Plassey, 1757, when the East India Company, from being merely a trading organization, started ruling a small part of what today we call as India, or a broader Indian subcontinent, where they were administrators, tax collectors, and so on. So this transformation happened when British fought a local Raja in Bengal, Bihar province, and then they established this small foothold. East India Company established small foothold that time. Colonialism, if you look at what actually happened during colonialism, it was exploitation, there were deprivation and domination. All three were essential characteristics of the colonialism. Colonialism also meant not just social injustice and racism, but also economic bleeding. The cotton, for example, was grown in countries like India, and the raw cotton was taken to Europe, where they were made into goods, and the goods were brought back to countries like India, and the market was flooded with this produced good, and thereby the value-added economic money was transferred to Europe. And there was a systemic effort to deindustrialize the pre-colonial India by destroying production systems, market, and by various protective tariffs. Many of this we might have studied, we might recall from our school days, what is broadly called as drain of wealth. And due to this whole economic policy, there were famines and infectious pandemics never seen in Indian history before. Of course, famines and pandemics are part of the human history, but the numbers and the period in which they repeated were extremely high, and they were all human-made. I mean, one can even say man-made, to be more precise, man-made during the colonial period. It is in this context that the national struggle and the national leaders who were leading the struggle, who were seeking political freedom, they understood that if you have to reconstruct social and economic India, you need to harness science and technology. Most of us might think, and we have been told by, let's say, maybe our school textbooks and so on, that the foundation of modern science in India happened as a part of a diffusion. When the colonial powers established surveys, irrigation work, railway, telegraph, this resulted in a diffusion of modern science and technology. That's what we are usually told. If you look at surveys, what is it? I mean, it's like making a map, cartographic map of area. But that was not that simple. In fact, why did East India Company engage in surveys? Why did they pay money? Why did they spend money? If you look at it, the surveyors told that if you go and survey a new area, you will be able to find out whether that area is worth invading. For example, the war with Tipu Sultan, after the first war, the East India Company was not inclined to fight with Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. But then the surveyor went there and showed what is the kind of goods which are being produced, and if East India Company can take over, what kind of income they will have. There is a report copy, so you can read that the report of the production of commerce and manufacture of southern districts and so on and so forth. Okay, so the surveys actually help the East India Company to focus on areas where they need to invade next. But when you have to indulge in this kind of activities like surveys, railways, telegraph, and so on, you cannot bring everyone from Europe, British. So you had to train some local natives within courts for various profession, and that's how the profession kind of emerged in India, and that's when the first universities like the Bombay University, the Madras University, and the Calcutta Universities were formed in 1850s. But then, what were the scientists getting? What were the British scientists who were doing this work in India were getting? They were getting fame. For example, the same surveyor which made the first maps of Bengal and Bihar and so on. There were a huge debate within geology, geography around that time in 1850s. What is the history of Earth? Did the topography of Earth was formed because of catastrophes, or is it because of some uniform change, gradual change? The people who were supporting catastrophism were essentially people who were trying to interpret the natural history of the earth in terms of certain Christian faith, like there was a flood and so on and so forth. But then on the other hand, the modern geologists like Hutton, Lyle, and so on were wanting to present a much more scientific view of the geology. But how do you know what happened? When they actually surveyed, for example, the Ganges and Brahmaputra river, how does that river river changes its course and so on, they were able to get evidences of changes that are happening. And in fact, this led to the growth of geology. But here one can also notice an important key point that the science that was done within the Indian subcontinent were largely data collection, but the theorization happened in metropolis. So there was also a division of labor around this time. That is why, for example, the person who actually identified the Mount Everest, or what is called as Peak 16, as the highest point in the Himalayan range, was Radhakant Siddhar, but the name for that peak went to a European, Everest. That's why we call it as Mount Everest. And many of us may not even know that the actual person who discovered Mount Everest was not Everest, but Radhakant Siddhar. By then, Mount Everest was actually retired. But it is not true that whenever there was an encounter between two cultures, there was always domination. This is the mistake that many of us make. As an example, let's look at, for example, the encounter of different cultures that took place in Savai Jai Singh's court. I'm sure we all know Savai Jai Singh, who established Jantar Mantar. Why did he establish Jantar Mantar? Because he found that the astronomical computations in his time was not matching with the actual observation. There were error, there were gap. So if you predict the position of, let's say, a particular planet, it is not there in the sky in the same place. So he wanted to improve the tables. So he set up this Jantar Mantar, and then in his laboratory, or we can call it as a laboratory, there were Jesuit astronomers. There were astronomers Hindu Jyotish. There were Arabic scholars. I have listed people. Okay, they worked together. There were no fight. There were intellectual fights. There were no discard in that sense. Okay, there were intellectual debates. It was a very immense project. In fact, he built 5 observatories around the country in northern India, but actually he was planning to build 100 so that he will get such a big data. It was a very big project. Okay, so it is an example of a cultural encounter where, for example, the European astronomers, the traditional Hindu astronomers, the Arabic scholars, they all came together, they discussed. There was some kind of conviviality. They were debating on rational growth. But the science that was done during the colonial period was very different. That's what I just wanted to point out here. It was different because it did not acknowledge the work of Indians. It was different because only data collection was done in India, the theorization was done elsewhere, so there was a work division. It was different because it was trying to train people only for doing lower level jobs, not for the higher level jobs. This was the context in which in the colonial period the science was growing in India. Parallelly, there were Indian efforts to harness modern science and technology. One example is Tipu Sultan. Tipu Sultan's effort in improving the rockets for firing missile is very well known today. So Tipu Sultan tried to use modern science and technology, and they were trying to. He was trying to develop missiles out of the rockets, which were essentially used for spectacle. Right? There were also other number of other technology that he worked on. For example, you have to bore a hole in a cannon. Okay, so for boring that hole, you need a mechanism. So he imported a mechanism from France. He customized it for an Indian condition. So it was a bullock cart drawn boring machine. Okay, so things like that were being developed in this Karkhana, in Tipu Sultan's Karkhana. So there was some effort bringing in customized science and technology to India. It is in this background we should look at the emergence of scientific societies in different parts of the country. Dr. Sandhya, when she was speaking, she pointed out a very important point that science can play a neutral platform. In fact, many of the scientific societies, when they formed, they said, we are forming this society because people in India who are divided by language, divided by caste, divided by religion, divided by region, can come together in a neutral place. That is why they formed associations which are named as Bihar Scientific Society, Madras Literary and Scientific Society. Okay, so all of them were literary and scientific societies, and there is a very interesting work by Dr. Panikar on this, how these societies provided a space for the growing Indian intelligentsia to interact beyond their social classes and their background. Okay, so I leave it to that. So there were a number of societies that were formed across the country where the native Indians were making effort to understand science and technology in much more deeper than what was being afforded in the universities. Why? Because the universities were essentially examination board. There was no research that was happening in the universities that was established by the colonial administration. They were merely examination and certification board. And you want to produce knowledge. It's not enough if you diffuse knowledge, right? So how do you produce knowledge? You need institutions. That is when 1876, Mahendralal Sarkar established Indian Association for Cultivation of Science in Calcutta, which provided space for Indians to do research. Few kilometers away there was Calcutta University. The Calcutta University has no labs where you can do research. Okay, but the association was formed, the Indian Association for Cultivation of Science was formed to provide space for Indians to do research. In fact, the research for which C.V. Raman got his Nobel Prize, that research was not done in Calcutta University, although C.V. Raman was working at that time in Calcutta University, but the research was done in Indian Association for Cultivation of Science, because there was no space for research in Calcutta University. Similarly, Jagga established an observatory, astronomical observatory in 1840 in Vijayanagaram, that is Vizag. Okay, like this, there were a number of Indians who took effort to establish organizations, institutions, platform where science research can take place. If you look at the first generation of Indian scientists like P.C. Ray or J.C. Bose or others, most of them were denied jobs in Calcutta University. The university college was established, and in the college, for professorship, provision was established, and that is how these people got jobs. Because the Britishers said it's only English people who will be able to teach science. The Indians will not have capacity. That kind of discrimination was there around that time. If you look at, I worked on this person, maybe you can read it up later. His name is Raghunatachari. He is the first Indian to become, in the modern times, the member of Royal Astronomical Society. He is credited with discovery of variable star and so many other discoveries. But he retired as first assistant to the government astronomer. Because in British time, that is the utmost level an Indian can go. Beyond that, you cannot be promoted. You cannot get any job beyond that. Okay? Even though his boss was very, good to him, was promoting him, providing him support, the system did not allow him to be promoted. So the scientists were also facing direct discrimination in colonial institutions. This is when the nationalists started demand for higher education in science and technology to end the discriminatory policy of the colonial government and also provide technical education, okay, and also call for national education and then apply science in sectors like industry, agriculture, and health. Not just in areas which will provide resources to the colonial government, which can be exploited by the colonial government, but which will provide good livelihood, good living environment for people in India. You know, issues like health and agriculture. Some of the pioneers, like say for example Venkiteswaran, he and his colleagues learned German because in those days German was the language of science. Today English is language of science, right? Most of the journals are published in English. In those days, before Second World War, German was the German journals were actually publishing the top ranked science. So they learned German so that they can translate that into English. Okay, and one of the earliest translation of Einstein in English is by Meghnad. Okay, so they took that effort, and when Bose came back from Europe after studying in Cambridge, came back from Europe, the Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University said that I cannot employ you in Calcutta University because you are not a British. Then finally, they had to accommodate him, but then they said that we will give you only 2/3 salary of what the British professor is getting. So Bose said that I will join, I will not even take one single pipe. Okay, and then finally Bose had to establish his own institution, which is the Bose Institute, which is there in Calcutta, because the research environment was not provided for Indians in the colonial administration. And this is also a period of Swadeshi, where the nationalists were talking about establishing Indian industry. Okay, so along with the Indian National Congress, there were industrial exhibitions from 1901, and that provided opportunity for indigenous industry to come up. And people like Professor Chandra Ray established industry. For example, the Bengal chemicals and pharmaceuticals was established by him, saying that we should not only be doing science, but also using the science to produce wealth. Industry should be established in India. It is in this context the Indian Science Congress Association was organized in 1914, when there was a growing number of Indians who were actually doing science, who were actually converting that science and knowledge into industry, and were trying to apply that for addressing problems in India. The Indian Science Congress Association was formed, which provided a space for Indian scientists to come together, discuss what direction in which we will go forward. The political movement also understood that if the free India has to develop, you need science, and that is the context in which in 1938, when Subhash Chandra Bose was the president of the Congress, he set up National Planning Committee. Okay, this National Planning Committee contained the some industrialists of that time. Scientists like Meghnad Saha was part of it. Jawaharlal Nehru chaired the committee in every meeting, and about which I think Dr. Chatterjee is going to speak a bit more, so I'm not going to elaborate here. So, if you look at the Indian freedom movement, almost various shades, different strands in the Indian freedom movement, thought that science and technology is important in free India. If once India gets attains freedom, if India has to become a country in the community of nations, then India should get its hands and feet in science and technology. That understanding was there across different strands in the national freedom movement. True, there were a few who argued that, or a part of a section who argued that industrialization, dams, and tractors were needed, and that's how the progress should happen. There were others who argued about rural industries that will generate high employment, large number of people will be kept in employment. There was this debate that was there in the freedom movement that was there, but neither of them rejected science. That's, I think, a key point that we should note. Many people today think that Gandhi was completely rejecting modern science. If you actually look through his work, it's not really true. He had a particular vision, which we all agree, that's a different issue, but it was not like rejecting modern science. In fact, his article on Singer mission, sewing machine, clearly says that we need missions like this, which will reduce drudgery of working people. But we need missions like this, which can be used by large number of people. So he was looking at a form of development where employment of large number of people will be the key. That's essential differences that they were talking about. It's not about not using any modern technology or science broadly. So the whole freedom movement, I mean, at least a very major section of it, thought science will be a harbinger of material progress, and it will be a potent tool for social and cultural change. And we would also need science and technology to fight social evils like caste domination, gender discrimination, exploitation, and so on. These are all some of the ethos that they were talking about during the freedom struggle. And if you look back, sure, if you look at some key industries like space or transport or milk or telecommunication or even in agriculture, we have made tremendous progress. But this tremendous progress is also has come with certain key challenges. So when you have high-rise building, that high-rise buildings are usually surrounded by a huge cluster of slums where the living condition is terrible, least to say, right? So if you look at the income levels in India, if I think most of us should be earning more than 64,000 or 65,000 per month, right? We are the top 5% of income earners in this country. 80% of people in this country are earning less than 15,000, 15,000. So that's a kind of stark inequality which is available, which is there in this country. If you earn more than 1 lakh, you are the top 3%. Okay, so the income inequality is terrible. These are all challenges that we have today. So we can and we should today ask this question to ourselves: did the dreams come true? Were the promises kept? Why the promises were not kept, if they were not kept? Where did we go wrong? Where are we heading now? And what is to be done? I think people who are going to speak after me are going to also reflect on some of these questions, and I think we need to take this together to assess where we are and also discuss what direction we need to take. So, to summarize, the common impression that many people have, many people say that modern science is a colonial imposition is wrong. That was not what was happening. The colonial systems was not predisposed or not were encouraging the development of science and technology in India. It is the effort of Indian national movement plus people who took interest and who saw that the future lies in the hands of science and technology, and that is how the foundation of modern science in India took place. With that, I will stop. Thank you.